Leadership is often described in terms of what a leader decides or delivers, but beneath every decision and every outcome sits a space the leader has helped shape. Not only a physical space, though that matters more than is often admitted, psychological space, cultural space, relational space. These environments form the conditions in which people interpret authority, understand expectations, and decide how much of themselves they're willing to bring to the work. In recent years, however, there's been a noticeable shift in how these spaces are spoken about in leadership circles. Attention to psychological safety, relational care, and cultural climate is increasingly framed as indulgent, slow, or incompatible with performance. In some sectors, there is an explicit turn back towards tighter control, clearer hierarchies, and a renewed emphasis on visibility, presence, and compliance. The language of outcomes, productivity, and discipline is being elevated as corrective to what some perceive as a period of excessive accommodation. This shift is not occurring in a vacuum. Leaders are under real pressure. Economic uncertainty, political volatility, and institutional fragility have made many organizations more anxious about execution and less patient with complexity. In that climate, leadership that attends to atmosphere can easily be dismissed as soft, distracted, or insufficiently serious about results. And yet, the turn away from curating space does not remove the influence of space itself. It simply leaves it unattended. Whether leaders choose to engage it or not, psychological, cultural, and relational environments continue to shape how people work, how risk is taken, how problems are surfaced, and how responsibility is carried. The difference is that when leaders stop treating these spaces as part of their work, they allow them to be shaped by fear, competition, and unspoken pressure rather than by intention. Psychological space forms the inner climate of a team. It shapes whether people believe they can speak honestly about emerging risks, incomplete thinking, or uncertainty without being quietly penalized for it. Leaders influence this space through tone, through how they handle challenge, through their response when something goes wrong, and through whether complexity is treated as an obstacle or as a feature of serious work. In many organizations today, leaders are being encouraged to narrow this space deliberately. The argument is that too much openness slows execution, that extended discussion dilutes accountability, and that clear instruction is more efficient than collective sense-making. Under pressure to deliver quickly and visibly, leaders are rewarded for reducing debate and accelerating compliance. The result can look like improved focus and tighter coordination, while quietly increasing the cost of surfacing problems early or naming uncertainty before it becomes operational risk. In more tightly controlled environments, psychological space narrows. People become more careful with what they disclose, more selective with what they raise, and more inclined to wait for instruction rather than exercise judgment. The short-term appearance of alignment can improve even as the organization's capacity for learning quietly weakens. Cultural space is shaped by what the organization truly rewards. Not what it publishes in strategy documents or leadership statements, but what is recognized, protected, and what is advanced in practice. Who's promoted? Who's listened to? Who's quietly sidelined? In periods of institutional anxiety, cultural norms often shift towards speed, compliance, and visible busyness. Reflection becomes suspect. Dissent is reclassified as friction. Careful work is overshadowed by urgent work. Leaders who do not attend to these signals may believe that they're strengthening performance while slowly training people to protect themselves rather than contribute fully. Relational space is where authority becomes either credible or merely positional. It is shaped by how leaders are encountered in everyday interaction. whether people feel seen only as resources or as participants in shared undertaking, whether conversations are primarily evaluative or genuinely developmental. In climates that emphasize toughness and delivery, relationships often become thinner and more instrumental. Information still flows, but it's filtered. Concerns are raised later, more cautiously, or not at all. The leader remains perhaps informed, but less accurately than they realize. The argument for curating space as a leader is not an argument against standards, accountability, or high expectations. It is an argument about what actually sustains them. Performance does not emerge simply from pressure. It emerges from environments in which people can think clearly, surface problems early, and take responsibility without excessive self-protection. Leaders who neglect the spaces in which work unfolds often compensate by tightening control, increasing monitoring, and narrowing discretion. These responses can stabilize behavior in the short term while eroding the very conditions that make good judgment and durable performance possible. Curating space is therefore not about comfort. It is about capacity. It is about noticing when fear begins to replace candor, when speed replaces sense-making, when compliance replaces commitment. It is about adjusting tone, expectations, and rhythms of work before defensive habits become normalized. It's about creating room for disagreement without allowing it to corrode trust, and for accountability without reducing people to outputs. Healthy spaces do not eliminate pressure. They make pressure workable. They allow teams to stretch without quietly burning through relational and cognitive reserves. They make it possible for leaders to step away without the system becoming brittle. They allow change to occur without disorienting the people responsible for carrying it. These spaces cannot be imposed through policy or reasserted through authority. They are formed through patterns of attention, through what leaders notice, interrupt, protect, and consistently model. They require leaders to understand themselves not as neutral operators within the environment, but as one of its most powerful shaping forces. Let's be honest. In a leadership culture that is increasingly impatient with relational and psychological considerations, curating space becomes a more demanding practice, not a more sentimental one. In fact, many leaders today seem to be abandoning the whole notion of paying attention to relational considerations. In the face of these prevailing winds, it requires leaders to hold firm to the conditions that make real work possible, even when those conditions are mischaracterized as weakness. It requires leaders to resist the false trade-off between care and competence, between humanity and performance. The spaces leaders curate are not accessories to leadership. They are the medium in which leadership is exercised. They shape how decisions are interpreted, how conflict is navigated, and how responsibility is distributed. They determine whether organizations merely comply under pressure or continue to think, adapt, and act with integrity when the pressure increases. This is not a fashionable form of leadership at the moment, but it remains an essential one.